Okay? Okay. So, hello everybody. Sorry for waiting. I'm Lucio, and I'm a software engineer at Namshi, and a nerd from Italy. I'm part of a community called Web Debressa, and sometimes I die. So today, I will try to describe you what happened in Namshi when we tried, actually when we did an isomorphic web application. So, what we're gonna briefly touch, we're gonna see how do we define an isomorphic application? What's an isomorphic application? Why we needed one, and why you might need one as well, and how we build one at Namshi. So basically, we're going to tell you what kind of journey we went through when we actually migrated our mobile website to an isomorphic application. So our requirements, choices that we had to do, and what we ended up doing. So as first, so there was a guy before asking me, he wasn't sure how to pronunciate isomorphic. So it's pretty easy, it's isomorphic because it comes from the Greek, and iso means equal, and morphic is the shape of things. So generally speaking, isomorphism is something, it's two things that basically look like the same. But when we move into the domain of web and isomorphic application, we need to actually define what are these two things that look the same. The two things that look the same in our case are going to be the client code and the server code. So I asked before if some of you are used to write JavaScript, because you can actually achieve something like this pretty much only using JavaScript, because it's the only language which is going to, well, Dart as well, but it's basically the only language which is going to be able to run both on the client and on the server. So the aim of an isomorphic application is to have the same JavaScript code, allowing you to render your page independently from the server or on the client side. And when we look at the website, a website is down to nothing, a bunch of nicely presented HTML with a nice layer on top. So to be isomorphic, we need to stop at the HTML. And take a note for your future self, because we're going to see during the presentation what actually this means and what it involves. So why do we actually need an isomorphic application? So the first easily spottable reason is robots. Whenever you create an SPA application, you're gonna have your whole content is going to be rendered on the client side, and when it's delivered to your client, it's usually either wrapped inside your code or it's yet to be there because you need to do an API call. So a robot which is creating your website most likely is going to have some problems figuring out your content, which is amazing, because if you think about, there is a company that does a search engine in the browser and they yet have to make them talk together. But bad things that happen. Loading speed. If you're, like in our case, if you're building a mobile website, the amount of time the user needs to download your code in order to spin up your website and actually have the content, it counts a lot, especially if the user has a crappy connection. Before doing this, our website was based on Angular, and I was on vacation in Kenya and I did this little test in the middle of the savannah where surprisingly there is an interconnection, but it's pretty slow. And it took more than a minute to load what was Namshi at the time, which is totally unacceptable. So one thing that is going to empower you to do with an isomorphic website is actually to deliver something that is promptly renderable from the client, so your user can start using it. And then there's this little problem with SPAs that JavaScript doesn't fail safe. So if your user is using a crappy Android phone from 2007 and it has this horrible Android browser, which sometimes it breaks for really odd reasons, boom, your user is going to have a white page in front of him, which is not exactly what you want. So, and Namshi, as I was telling you, we had to turn our website, our mobile website, from this one to this one. which it doesn't look like to be much different, but that's one of the points. Because even not being that different, they need to be quite different inside. Sorry, it's a bit low, but this one is going to be the SPA page, and that one what we wanted to get out of the isomorphic page. So on this side, we have about almost 200 Ks of JavaScript, including the application itself. We wanted to get down to 100 kilobytes, library included. We have, so we tried to evaluate our website with Google PageSpeed, and we were achieving around 40 points on Google PageSpeed. So we tried to shoot for at least 90 points in PageSpeed, so we could actually measure an improvement. On this side, yes, we were using AngularJS. On that side, we have totally no clue what to use. So we started out, it was me, our VP of technology, and another colleague is Shidin, that maybe some of you saw yesterday talking here. So we started out with the two most popular kids on the block. Angular, we were using Angular already in our stack, in many applications. React is pretty hot, we know it, it's pretty cool in a number of reasons. So we started evaluating what one or the other could actually give us and how they could help us going for an SPA page, for an isomorphic website. So we are already using it, as said, in our SPA, the dependency injection, how it works, how to modularize the application. It's well known to us. And it has a really compelling and easy to use data bindings model, as well as integrates the Jade template library, which it's kind of a quite big help when you have developers actually writing HTML, which usually not always turn out that well. It's easy to know what structure of the HTML, writing pure HTML, and Jade usually it's more familiar. But it has some shortcomings in terms of isomorphism, because actually to make it isomorphic, so to allow the client to render on the server, it needs a ton of tooling. Namely, you need an headless browser to actually query your application, make Angular go and produce the HTML that at the end you can serve to the client, which is like, ooh, a little odd. So we went and looked at the React. It's new and fashionable, like every JavaScript developer loves the new library out there. And as JavaScript developers, we are eager to try it and we're ready to do it. And plus, we start digging inside this guy and we see it has really nice feature. Namely, the virtual DOM, it looks amazing, this capability that he has to actually have a snapshot of what of your UI in memory and fastly modify everything without causing too much render cycle, and the flux pattern, which it's a better refined version of HMVC if you want. Once you get it, because at the beginning was, for some of us, it seemed like a bit hard to wrap our mind around it, but when you get it, it's a really good idea. And we'll see why. So we're looking at React again, and then we knocked our head against JSX, which is not exactly at first look that compelling. It doesn't look like that nice as Jade does in terms of how it simplifies your code or how your developer may react to it. Jade is still completely divided, and instead having this bunch of XML returned by your JavaScript, sometimes doesn't feel that good at the beginning. And then it has this really nice idea, which comes even from a common JS, and as well as from a bunch of other things around, which is adding components. So componentize your application, your website, cut it down into singular bits, and just implement it just like you would do with an SOA architecture. Basically, your page becomes an SOA architecture, which is lovely an idea. And the internet says it can be isomorphic too, the internet. So let's try it, classic kid. And so So we started going out throughout all the examples we could find out there. There were stuff from Yahoo and some from independent developers. Everything felt really complex, really convoluted, involving a ton of library on top to reconstruct the state and to actually manage the routings and actually obtain an HTML page. So unfortunately, even if we were very enthusiastic in doing this, like we just look at each other like, no, this React thing is not gonna make us live like a nice life. So we're back to square one, and we still had to choose. Like these two guys were still in front of the same piece of paper with these two logos, and like, okay, what do we do? Well, let's try something else. So we started digging around well-known and old library like Backbones, or even jQuery, or new stuff like Rack.js, which is a library from the, I don't remember, from a newspaper from London, I don't remember the name, which is really nice, but the problem is 150K, so it's way heavier than we wanted to do, so let's think again. And so when thinking, we just faced this idea of, let's throw everything away. Let's basically forget what happened in the last 10 years of web development and try to make our own thing, just digging out the best thing we can find. So we started summarizing what we liked about Angular and what we liked about React and try to bring them together somehow. Yeah, with the flux capacitor, which... So how it ended up working. Have a step back, try to understand exactly what a website is, what your view is, and what your website needs to do. Again, like for what the React concern, the React, just like every new library, JavaScript library comes out, when it gets hot, it seems that is the solution for all the world's problem, and it most likely it isn't. React is a great tool if you need to do, as far as I'm concerned, a really specific domain of application, but for something like in our case, which is that it's an e-commerce. It's a scrolling, it's a list of stuff you can buy and some faces. It's not rocket science. So we started, so basically we can try to understand how the web view is built up, generally speaking, and we're always gonna have a data content. Either you have a WordPress application, your data content is gonna be your blog post itself, or you have an SPA page, which is the data that comes from the API you're going to call at some point in time. Then you have a template. It's the dress of your web page application. So it's wherever you're going to inject the data that comes from the API, or whatever is going to be around your blog post if you are inside a WordPress post, for instance. And on top of this, which is really something that we're starting having since 2004 on, there is your interaction. So the bells and whistles that actually make your user happy, all the eye candy stuff, and everything else. So how do we try to cope all these parts to obtain our freaking isomorphic application? First thing is get away the layer that can cause you problems. So the bells and whistles were really nice for your user. They don't participate within the rendering of your HTML. They're totally, if you try to actually put all the stuff inside there, you're just gonna give yourself a problem, which it doesn't even matter. So let's take that away. And if you remember the note I asked you to take for the future, this is where we are using it, basically. So we want to go down to what the HTML, what the guys at CERN thought about a web page when they firstly invented it. So this is basically, in a nutshell, what you need. So let's start analyzing it part by part. So we started looking at our API, and our API has basically two forms. And we can see it in these two. It's pretty simple. It has three fields. You're gonna have your data, which is basically your products or the page you need to display, meta tags, everything that concur to your meta part of the HTML page, and search, which is the parameter that brought you there. There is one particular incarnation of the API, because it is an structured API, which is when the data is going to be a string, which means the server is returning me not a list of product, but it's actually returning me a page to display. Let's say a brand page. You enter, you go to Mango because you want to see my Mango dresses. The first page you're going to see it's a brand page because, like, you know, accord with a brand. So this is one of the cases. So let's start. At this point, we moved on and tried to choose what we wanted to do with the template. We had two main points. One, we needed something. So first of all, we have Jade. We already have all our templates. We already had all our templates at that point in time in Jade because we were coming from Angular. And then we needed something that could be renderable on the client side. So we went for this Nunjux, which is a library from Firefox. It has a syntax close to Sweep, which was already a tool used inside Namshi. And it could render a template, actually fill up a template, more of a render a template, starting from the HTML with all the placeholder in place, both from the server and on the client side. So we are starting to get there slowly. We know that we have the data. Data can be queried from both client and server. We have something that can produce HTML from client and server. Okay, we're kind of getting there. And then let's start to think about the architecture of this guy. And so we started bringing back what we liked about React, so Flux. Flux, in a nutshell, it's a pattern that helps you move your single source of truth from spread out in all different parts of the model, like you have it in the HMVC, to one single point. Actually, more than Flux Redux, but still, like the idea is pretty much there. And then you have a really single path where your information are going to go. Namely, once the information get in, you're going to say to all your components in the UI, we have new data. Everybody's going to say, okay, I have to do something. I don't have to do anything. And when an interaction happens, you're just going to have a message say, update the data. And the cycle goes on. So it's pretty neat and pretty simple. We like it. So our data source, again, is the API. And the state, we're going to use the URL state. Because having an unstructured API means that what's inside the path inside our URL is more, it can match exactly what we send as search parameters to our API. So it can be a one-to-one map, and as another value on top of it, we're going to have an easy way to match the state between the client and the server. And we just needed to add a dispatcher for closing the loop inside the Flux architecture. So if we go and look at the server, the code, we can see this is basically not the main entry point of the server. This is the only entry point of the server. Beside really like logging and error handling and a bunch of other things that you usually still need inside the application, this is in a nutshell, for real, our mobile web server. This is all of it.
Yep. What about API?
Yeah, API is a library that does a GET call, and it's a code. It's shared between server and client, and it uses super agent because super agent is a nice library that runs on both client and server. So at the end, what's going to happen? It's an Express application. It's pretty simple. It will answer to every possible call. The first thing we're going to do, as said, since our URL, the path, it's our state, we're going to figure it out what the user is asking us to render. And at that point, we're just going to get the data out of the API. Once we got it, we're going to just inject it inside our template renderer. So in the main file, basically, you have the main hooks for all the components. So every component is going to receive the data and is going to decide what to do at a point in time. And once you obtain your HTML, boom, you just send it to the client. And on the client side, so on the part of the JavaScript that gets loaded on the client, which is not mandatory at this point, because the HTML we obtain out of this guy, it's already Linked, it has everything inside, so the user can actually click on links and it still navigates even if the JavaScript is not there. So, how does this thing work? Okay. So this is instead the counterpart on the client. So this is the entry point for the client. And if you look at the code, it's pretty much the same. It has the same kind of entry point. It does the same thing. It figures out a path name. The only thing it broadcasts an event that is going to tell to people were updating. And then it calls our API again, and when it's done, it says the people were done updating the data, okay? And that's pretty much it. So what happens inside the components? They activate on state update, so as I was saying, whenever either our template renderer or the event says to the components we have new data, they just pop up, and they start saying, okay, I'm ready to receive data, give me data, I want to decide what to do. They get the data, and if they need, they transform it, and they give whatever result freely, and then they delegate to the template renderer for final HTML delegation. So this is an example of a small component. It's a title component. The reason is to be able to fit it in a slide. Whereas actually there's no other reason to do it. So this is what a component. Component is gonna, this is the title. It's namely what's rendered the title tag. No rocket science. It gets called, inject the data. What it does is looks on the data for either meta SEO page title, so it's our meta structure, or for just the title field, or if it doesn't find even one of them, it's going to just return namshi.com. It gets the text, it gets the title template as HTML, which includes the non-juxt syntax, and it's just going to give it the text parameter for it to render. And if you go and see and check out what the template is, this is basically the template. It says, okay, this is something that comes from the data ISO, the ISO component. It's a property we define to be able to couple these two things together. And it's just going to inject exactly the same, the same property we defined here. It's just going to inject it inside the tag value. And we obtain our tag. But then, so we have basically our HTML renders from both server and client at this point, but what about the interaction? Because we stripped it away at the beginning. So the HTML is there, you can click it, you can navigate, but it doesn't give you much wow effect. It's pretty much like a 1990s website. So according to a legend, it turns out that back in the 90s, humans were able to use websites by simply clicking on links and without fancy UI effects. So we just decided to say, fuck it, we don't need it. Actually, no. So the interaction, it's a third layer that we apply on it. We call them widgets. They exist only on the client side because they don't need to be isomorphic, as I was saying. And they react just as components to whatever kind of UI change happens. And they decide just as components if they need to come and play with us or not. They detect components, they attach to components, they activate components. They attach to the ISO components parts, and they interact with our components throughout another data property, which is nm star. Like nm, and you define the event you want to interact with. And to not reinvent the wheel furthermore, we went for this Vue library, which is pretty compelling because it just gives you the data binding proper from Angular, and which is a really thin layer on top, and you have that good part without just having the wall Angular coming towards you. So how a widget is created, basically, it's really similar to a component. The difference is you're going to have a DOM object inside instead of data because you're going to attach to a DOM object. And you can either go directly and use the native JavaScript or jQuery like events. And when, for instance, this one is the one that opens the search bar. So on top of our website, we have a search bar. When you touch it, it opens. And so this one, in this case, what it needs to say, just open the search bar, and that's pretty much it. But it's not that anything else is much bigger than this. And on the other side, yeah, this is the HTML, the render HTML. And at some point, so this is data binding, so it gets a function. And then, sorry, because I'm not finding it.
It's a jet file.
Huh?
It's a jet file.
No, this is HTML file. This is nunchucks.
Oh.
Okay, navigation open, shift component, so it's going to open the navigation. I think I did some wrong, but basically this is the idea. Sorry for that. So, did we get to what we were looking for? Isomorphism, yes. We have finally the isomorphic website. It works pretty nicely. It's more than 1 year old. 1 year old at this point in time. It's surviving pretty well. A bunch of people develop and touch it, and it's still pretty good shape. The size, it's a little bit far off the 100Ks we went for, but we actually have all the dependencies inside and all our templates. And in terms of page speed, take it with a grain of salt, because this measurement was took before we actually stick it in all the Google trace and oh my god, Google tag things and everything to trace your user. Plus, as if you remember, one of the things I said, our API returns HTML, so the content team produces that HTML, and that can influence a lot the page speed score. But one day, my colleague Shidin came to me and showed me this. So the application itself, it can achieve 100% page speed, which was a pretty compelling result. I was pretty happy with this. So at the end, what we used was Node.js, Browserify for the dependency injection, Gulp to stick everything together, produce the client, Nunchucks, just to have our templates on both the client and the server side. Completely vanilla JS, like 99% vanilla JS. It's basically like 3-4 libraries, literally on the client side you have Vue and Super Agent, just to not mess around with XHR directly. And Express on the server, which is pretty easy. And Docker, because we work, thanks to the Java guy, in a Dockerized environment. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, otherwise I can do it. Yes?
Do you do input field validation on client and server with the same code?
We do input field validation on the client, and that's pretty much more courtesy towards the user. But since again, it's an e-commerce, like you don't have many data input unless it's a search. Okay, this thing doesn't include the user part. User and cart are two different applications. This is a catalog. Any other question? Well, so I guess you're free to go in. Thank you.